To check out all our products, go to musicnomadcare.com.
Hi, I'm Geoff Luttrell, owner of Sonoma County Guitar Works and San Francisco Guitar Works, and today I'm going to set up this beautiful Gretsch guitar. With the goal of making high-quality setups accessible to everyone, my collaboration with MusicNomad has helped develop the Keep It Simple setup system to help you make your guitar play and sound great. Now we'll move on into the Keep It Simple setup process. In the setup gauge kit, there's an instruction manual for the Keep It Simple setup system. I'll be using the fixed radius bridge setup flow on this guitar because this bridge is a fixed radius. What that means is that the saddles are not adjustable up and down individually. They're all part of a single base. So they have to be filed in order to make the correct string radius, but I'll explain all that coming up. So the standard flow for this type of guitar is we'll do our pre-setup steps, which was the cleaning, restringing, tuning of the instrument. Then we will do our truss rod adjustment, which is going to be the nut under this cover at the end of the fretboard, and that will adjust the neck relief. The next thing that we'll do is we'll set our string radius. So we're going to use a radius gauge, and we're going to measure the arc of the strings at the bridge, and then use files to correct that radius and make it the exact same radius as the fingerboard. The next thing we'll do is set the string action. So that will be raising and lowering the bridge to correct the height of the strings above the frets at the 12th fret. Next we will do the nut height. So that will involve measuring the height of the strings above the first fret using the nut height gauge, and then we'll file the slot depths to make the strings be the correct height over the first fret using the diamond coated nut file set. After that, we'll do our intonation, which is the adjustment process that makes the guitar play in tune with itself. So all your fretted notes play in tune with the open strings, and that's done by adjusting the saddles forward and backward, depending on whether or not the note is sharp or flat. And lastly, we'll set our pickup heights, and then we'll be completely done, and this guitar will play and sound great. So this is a brand new Gretsch straight out of the factory, and very often guitars from the factory need setups to really play their best. So we'll get into this and see if we need to make any adjustments to bring this guitar into spec. So this guitar has already had the MusicNomad spa treatment. It's been cleaned, fingerboard's been conditioned, frets have been polished, and has a new set of strings on it. So stringing a Bigsby can be frustrating. That ball ends have a tendency to pop off the pins as you're trying to get the guitar strung to pitch. So here are a couple of tips for making that a little bit easier for you. The first thing is whenever you get your string out of the pack, you're going to want to bend the ball end of the string around and make a little, little hook with it like that. That's going to enable you to hook it underneath the Bigsby and put the ball onto the pin and then pull the string up over the bar while keeping tension on it and keeping the ball end from falling off. Another way that you can do it is if you have a piece of foam, you can stick a piece of foam between the body and the pin, and that'll just hold the ball end up onto the pin. But as you're doing this, you want to keep tension on your string as you pull it over the bar, and then you want to bring it up, put it through your tuner, whatever tuning or whatever string method you use, and then you want to keep tension on it. That's really critical. So what I do is I put my index finger down on it by the nut, and then I'll hook it with my pinky. So you're able to keep a lot of tension on the string this way, and then you can hold tension on it as you wind your string to pitch. So that's really that'll really keep your strings on the Bigsby well, and keep the ball ends from popping off. Now the last thing you want to do whenever you're stringing your Bigsby up, before you string it all the way to pitch, is you want to make sure that the strings are coming around the bar and are going over the tops of the pins. It's very easy to have them not going straight over the top, so you have them kind of coming off the side. And what can happen is as you use the Bigsby, they move themselves to center, and then the guitar goes out of tune. So just make sure, like I said, make your hook, put it on the pin, keep tension on the string, get your string through your tuner, keeping tension on it, tune it to pitch or close to, come back here, make sure that your string is coming perfectly over the ball end and the pin, and you should be really good on your Bigsby. One thing that you do want to make sure of, though, anytime you're working on a Bigsby, is they have a tendency for the spring to shift in the little cup down here. So whenever you're getting ready to string it up, you just want to make sure that your spring is down inside the cup that holds it, and it's not sitting up on the lip. That can cause the arm to set up a little bit high, and then when you're using it, the spring can drop down in, and then your guitar goes out of tune. So you just want to make sure that the spring in here is well seated in the bottom and is around the nut here on the tremolo arm. Lastly, if you find that you're using heavy strings or your arm is really low to the top of the guitar, you can get stiffer springs, and you can also buy washers that will increase the spring tension on the Bigsby and will raise the arm up. If you, like I said, if you're using a heavier string gauge, or if you just find that the arm is too low to the guitar for you. It's always important to make sure your guitar is in tune before you start your setup process. On many guitars, you need to lower the pickups to prevent magnetic interference with the strings, but these Filtertron style pickups have a very low magnetic pull, so we don't need to lower the pickups to keep them from causing improper oscillations on the strings. Typically, Stratocaster is going to be your biggest offender as far as high magnetic pull on the strings. The first thing that I'm going to do is adjust the truss rod to set the proper amount of neck relief. Relief is a term used for the amount of curvature in the neck from front to back. If the neck looks like a banana and the center of the neck is really far away from the strings, then the neck would be said to have a lot of relief. If the neck is perfectly straight, or if you put a straight edge on it and it touched all the frets, that would have no relief. And if the neck is bent backwards so that the middle of the neck comes up towards the strings, that would be called back bow. The reason that you need a little bit of relief in the neck is that when the string oscillates, it oscillates generally in an oval pattern. It's fixed on the ends and it vibrates in a larger arc in the center. So you want to have a little bit of relief in the neck to create some space for that string to oscillate, and it allows you to have a much more even action up and down the neck than if you set the neck perfectly flat. So the way that we'll adjust the relief is by using the truss rod. And the truss rod is a metal bar in the, or metal rod rather, inside the neck that is anchored at one end. On this guitar it happens to be anchored at the body end. And at this end on the peg head it has a nut that's on a threaded end that bears against the neck wood. Whenever you tighten that nut, it shortens the truss rod and it pushes the middle of the neck up, or pulls the headstock backwards, depending on how you look at it, but it decreases relief. It makes the neck straighter. When you loosen, turning the nut counterclockwise, it allows the neck to relax, the strings pull it up, and it increases the amount of relief in the neck. The first thing I'm going to do is put in my pick capo to hold my low E string down against the first fret. Then I'll put the guitar in the playing position. Now I will get my truss rod gauge and open this up, and I'm going to want to set my relief curve to 6/1000ths of an inch. So I will fret my low E string between the 12th and 13th fret, and now I've made a straight edge with my string between the 12th fret and the 1st fret. Now I'll take my 6/1000ths of an inch feeler gauge, and these are really nice sets of feeler gauges. They come with a 6 thou, 8 thou, and 10/1000ths of an inch thickness gauges. They're marked for what type of guitar or bass they're used for, and they have a little legend on the front to show you how to turn your truss rod to increase or decrease your relief. And they're also not greasy like the ones that you buy at the hardware store. So on the legend on the truss rod gauge, you have 3 indicators. You have no touch, a light touch, or a medium to high touch. So what that means is that if you have no touch, when you push the gauge between the fret and the string, there will be no contact between the string and the gauge because there will be too much space between the fret and the string. If you have a light touch, that's going to be just an imperceptible amount of drag between the gauge and the string. It won't be moving the string, but you'll hear just a little bit of drag. That is properly adjusted. If you push the gauge between and it lifts the string and moves it, and you hear a lot of sound from the contact between the fret and the gauge and the string, then that is a heavy touch, and you would know that your neck needs more relief because the gap is too small. So now I've put in my pick capo and I'm going to fret between the 12th and 13th fret. Now there's a reason that it's done with those frets. It takes out the nut out of the equation, the pick capo holding down at the first fret, and also fretting between the 12th and 13th fret as opposed to the last fret, which I see done sometimes out on the internet. That eliminates any kick or fall away that you might have on the tongue from influencing the relief curve. So you're really looking at the main part of the neck that is affected by the truss rod. So that's why we do it that way. And you might be wondering, why the truss rod first? Well, the reason that we do the truss rod first is because having done literally thousands and thousands of setups at this point and having a Plek machine to verify what we already knew, we know that 6/1000ths of an inch of relief is going to work really well on this guitar. And so once you've set your relief, the adjustments that I do on the bridge and the adjustments that I do on the nut are not going to impact the relief curve. So the goal with the Keep It Simple setup method is that you do not have to go back and redo things that you've already done. You set your truss rod and then it stays where it is. You set up your bridge, it stays where it is. You cut the nut, then you're done with that, and then the guitar is completely set up. So that is the reason for the method. So now that I have the pick capo in, I'm ready to take my measurement. I'm going to fret between the 12th and 13th fret, and now I'll use my 6/1000ths of an inch gauge. It's marked electric guitar, and I'm going to measure at the 6th fret, and I'm going to push the gauge in between the string and the fret. And I'm hearing a little bit more rub than I want, and I'm deflecting the string a little bit. I can see it lifting just a little bit, so I want to go ahead and loosen my truss rod to give the neck the proper amount of relief. In order to adjust my truss rod, I'm going to need to remove my truss rod cover. This guitar's cover is held on with 3 screws, so I'll go ahead and remove those. If you have a vintage Fender or certain other guitars, you may have a truss rod nut that's at the body end of the neck, and you might have to take the neck off to adjust the truss rod, which is kind of a hassle, but that's the way it goes. But a Gibson, Gretsch, many other guitars have the headstock adjust truss rod, which is very convenient. So you go ahead and take off your cover, put your screws in your little case here. It's a nice little holder for all your small parts, and that will allow you to access the truss rod nut. The MusicNomad truss rod toolkit has a truss rod wrench for just about every guitar made. So this should be easy to find. This is going to be a 4mm Allen wrench, and I've got that right here. So a couple of things about truss rods. There are 2 types. There's a single acting and double acting. A single acting truss rod only applies pressure to the neck. It does not force the neck into relief. So if you have a single acting truss rod, if you don't have enough relief and you back the nut off all the way, and it still doesn't have enough relief, then you can't really do anything about it. You need to take your guitar to a shop and have the neck addressed. But if you have a double acting truss rod, you loosen the truss rod. If you keep going, it tightens up again, and then it actually pushes relief into the neck. So it not only takes relief out, but it pushes relief in, so it's pretty handy. I can tell that this is a double acting truss rod, but I'm only going to need to adjust it just a very little bit to get to where I want to be on my relief. So the way that you would know if you have a double acting or single acting rod, there are a couple of ways. If you have a Gibson, it's a single acting. If you have a nut that you can see the threaded rod coming through, then you know it's single acting. If it's a captured Allen wrench, most often it's double acting. But the way that you'll know mechanically is if you loosen your nut up and then all of a sudden it gets loose and it comes off, it's single acting. If you loosen it and it gets loose and then you keep going and it gets tight again, then it's double acting. So I've loosened my truss rod nut a little bit by turning it counterclockwise. So as you're looking at the nut, turning it counterclockwise allows more relief in the neck. Turning it clockwise tightens the rod and takes relief out of the neck. So I've done that, and I'm going to recheck my relief setting with my truss rod gauge. So at my 6th fret, coming right in, oh yeah, that's perfect. I have just a tiny bit of drag. It's not moving the string at all, and that's going to be exactly where I want it. Whenever you're looking at your truss rod to determine whether to turn it clockwise for less relief or counterclockwise for more relief, The terminology means that you're looking at the nut from the side that you would put the wrench in. So for me, I'm looking at the nut from this direction, so counterclockwise is going to be lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, clockwise, that's going to tighten it and take out relief. With my truss rod adjusted correctly and the 6/1000 of an inch relief in the neck, I can go ahead and take out my pick capo, and I'm going to move down to the bridge and check my bridge radius. So when the strings were off of the guitar, I measured my fretboard radius, and I have a 12-inch radius. So to determine that, I used my MusicNomad radius gauge that's included in the Action Gauge kit. It's really great. It's black, high contrast, white lettering, and it has some reminders on here about matching your string radius to your fretboard radius. So if you forget, you've got a little legend on here as well as the book to fall back on if you need to. So I've measured a 12-inch radius, and the way I did that was when the strings were off, I put my radius gauge on the fret, the last fret, and I determined which side of my gauge matched the arc of the fret. So now I'll measure my radius at my bridge. And this is not a good radius. The D string's really high, it's not touching the A string, the G, or the B, so it's really only touching the E, the D, and the E. So to use the radius gauge most effectively whenever you're measuring your bridge radius, you want to put the gauge about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch in front of the bridge. If you have a Telecaster that has the bridge with the wings on the side, you might have to put it a little farther up. Sometimes, depending on the width, it'll interfere with the gauge, but you can just scoot it up until the gauge rests on the strings. And there are a few different ways that you can look at this gauge to see what's actually happening. And just remember, this is probably you're learning a new measuring skill, and just be patient with yourself because it takes a little bit of time to develop the eye to see this every time accurately, but you can do it. So a couple of ways you can do this is you can set the gauge lightly on the strings, and you can just look, try to have something, maybe light behind your gauge so that you can see the gap between the string and the gauge, and just see, okay, I can see that the E is touching but the A is not, the D is touching but the G is not, so you can just have a visual. Another good way is you can set the gauge lightly on and you can pluck the strings and you can hear what's buzzing on the gauge and what isn't. So I can hear the E buzzing, D's buzzing, and the high E is buzzing, but the A is not, the G barely, and the B is not. So that's a good way to know how close they are to the gauge. And lastly, you can take the gauge and just very lightly set it on, and you can bounce it up and down just very, very lightly, and you can see what strings are moving and what strings are not. So those are 3 good ways to look at this gauge as you're kind of calibrating your eye to the measuring tools. So I can see that I've got some work to do here. I need to bring down my E and D and G. My E, D, and E. So what I'm going to do is get together a set of diamond-coated nut files that are the appropriate gauges for these strings. I'm going to file down the string slots that are high until I have all of the strings perfectly touching the radius gauge. So this guitar has a set of 10s on it, so that's a 10, 13, 17, 26, 36, 46 thousandths of an inch string gauges. So I'll use the electric guitar light gauge diamond coated nut file set, which is the exact gauge for this set of strings. Anytime you're cutting a saddle slot or a nut slot, you want to be sure that you have the nut file that is the same as the string you're using, or up to about 4 thousandths of an inch bigger. So I've got my correct set of files here, and I like to address the guitar from above like this. I like to file, I'm right-handed, so I like to be able to file the saddles from the right. Whenever you're filing saddles, or a nut for that matter, you always want to remember to file down at a bit of an angle towards the tailpiece or towards the peg head, because you want to make sure that the saddle is cut with an angled slot so that the string takes off from the very front of the saddle. If you have a saddle that's cut flat on the top or even rounded over, you can get overtones, or you can have sustain issues or sitaring sound that will sound like fret buzz, but it's really a buzz from the saddle. So as long as you keep your file cutting down at a few degree angle, you're going to be fine. You'll have a nice crisp front edge, and you'll have a good sustain and good tone. So I know that filing the bridge saddles could seem intimidating, but as long as you're deliberate and careful and take your time, you'll be able to do this. The files are a nice, smooth, even cut. They leave a nice polished slot on the saddle that'll be the perfect size for your string. So just don't be too aggressive, and you'll get through it fine. So the way that I do this is I will pull the string out of the slot, saddle slot, like so. And like I said, my E, D, and E are all touching the gauge, and the other strings are too low. So I'm going to start with my low E. So I'm going to grab my 46 gauge nut file, which is the same gauge as my low E string, and I'm going to come in here from above, and I'm going to put it right in the saddle slot. Now these have, and if you're filing a tune-o-matic, particularly an import tune-o-matic, sometimes they have a very sharp peak at the front edge of the saddle. So a little bit of material removal is actually going to move the string a fair amount because it's sitting on a very, very tiny point. So your first few strokes, you want to double check things pretty quickly. So I'll take my file, put it in the slot, and then like I said, you're going to angle it down a little bit. You're not going to do it so much that you hit the back of the bridge, but if you imagine having it parallel to the string and then just lift up the back a little bit, that's going to be an appropriate angle. So I'll do that, and then I'm just going to go back and forth, and I'm going to file a little bit. You want to make sure you have a little bit of metal shavings coming off. If you put it in and just barely touch and do this, you're going to be here all day. So you want to have a little bit of movement with the file. Let it do the work for you. A little bit of pressure. Then you put your string back in, pull the guitar back up, and you're going to check. So now I'm rocking on the D string. So I did lower the E. So now I definitely need to bring down the D. So for that, I will use the 28 gauge file, pull the D out of the slot, put the file in the slot, angle it down a little bit, give it a quick file, grab my gauge. Okay, that's a lot better now. Actually, it looks like I might be in good shape. So I'm going to just pluck my strings. My B is a little low. So I'm going to bring down my high E string, because all the strings rang out except for the B, which is a touch low. So I think if I bring down my E, I'm going to be able to pick up the other strings and be in good shape here. All right, so coming in here with my 10 file for that. I'm closer, but I'm still not quite there. So I'm going to need to go just a little bit farther. But it's always better to go slow and deliberately make sure you don't go too far. And with a little bit of patience, you'll get there no problem. All right. So I'm still a little rocking in the middle now. So my D and G need to come down just about 2 strokes, and I'll be in good shape. So if you have a couple of strings that are high, you can file on both of them a little bit, to bring them both down if you know they're going to have to come down. But going one by one is always the safest move. So now I'll take down my D. Yeah, and it's very, very common on a bridge like this, a tune-o-matic, that you only have to file, 2 or 3 saddles. And then, you might have to touch up a couple more just to get them that last little bit. All right. So I am good. I have got a perfect 12-inch radius on this bridge now. So, you know, didn't take too long, and it was pretty out of whack. So now we're good. It matches our fretboard radius exactly. And the reason that it's important to have your radius of your bridge be the same as your fretboard is it makes an even action from string to string across the fretboard. If you have a bridge radius that does not match your fretboard, you're going to have some strings that are high, some strings that are low, and it'll make an uneven feel across the fretboard. So now that I have done that, I'm going to take my string action gauge and I'm going to measure my action height. Now, I want to set this guitar up for a nice, low, comfortable action, you know, just like you would want this guitar to have. You want this thing to play super sweet and be buttery smooth. So we're going to use our electric guitar low-medium setting, which is 60 thousandths of an inch of action height on the bass side and 50 thousandths on the treble side. So to measure my action height, I'm going to use my string action gauge. Now this is a really critical tool for guitar setups. This is going to allow you to measure your action height, your pickup distance from the strings. It has a legend to show you recommended action heights for different types of guitars and basses. Super, super handy. I really like that it's black with white lettering. It's a high contrast and it's really easy to read. So to use the thousandths of an inch legend, on the side of the gauge that says string action gauge, on the long side you have a series of lines that have numbers above them. So those numbers represent how far from the bottom of the gauge the line is. So to use the gauge sits down on to the frets, and you're looking for what line corresponds with the bottom of the string that you're measuring. The way that I'll do that is I'll first put in my pick capo to hold my low E string down onto the first fret. And then I'll put my guitar back in the playing position. It's important that these measurements are taken in the playing position because the guitar neck will flex whenever it's laying on the cradle cube because of gravity, and you want to make sure that you have correct action height for when the guitar is actually being played. So now I'll take my gauge, long side against the frets, and what I'm looking at is I'm looking for what line matches up to the bottom of the string at the 12th fret. So what I'm seeing here is that my 60 line, the 0.06 representing 60 thousandths of an inch, that line is just being covered by the string. So what that means is that the string height is 55 thousandths of an inch. If it's sitting on top of the 60 line, it's 60 thousandths of an inch. If it's covering the line, you deduct 5 thousandths to make 55 thousandths, and then the next step down would be sitting on top of the 50 line for 50 thousandths. So that's how you read the gauge. And I'm seeing here 55 thousandths on my bass side, and then I want to measure my treble side. You can move your pick capo if you want, or you can just fret the string at the first fret. I'm just going to fret the high E, and I'm going to put my gauge behind the high E string right on the frets, and at the 12th fret I'm trying to look between the strings and the frets, trying to keep as much of a 90-degree angle to my gauge as I can, and I'm seeing here that this is covering the 70 line, but there's a gap above the 60 line, so I have 65 thousandths of an inch on the treble side. So I'm sitting at 55 and 65. So my recommended heights are 60 thousandths on the bass side and 50 on the treble. So I'm a little too low on the bass and a little too high on the treble. So I'm going to raise my bass side of my bridge and lower the treble side of my bridge to correct that action height. Now this Tune-O-Matic has thumb wheels underneath it that allow you to raise and lower the bridge height. So with the thumb wheel, what you do is you turn it counterclockwise to raise the bridge because it's on a threaded post. So when you turn it counterclockwise, you're loosening it and it's raising up. Or you turn it clockwise to lower the bridge to lower your action. So on my bass side, I'm going to turn this counterclockwise a little bit to raise my action. And on my treble side, I'm going to turn it clockwise to lower my action. Then I'm going to recheck. So now I can see clearly the 60 line sticking out from under the string. So I know I'm right at 60 thousandths of an inch on the bass side. And then on my treble side, I'm still very high. I'm sitting at about, well, not very high, but I'm sitting at about 60. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this down a little bit more. A few turns. Now I'm at about 55. And now I am right at 50. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out my pick capo, and I'm going to retune the instrument. Anytime you make an action adjustment, you want to retune. Make sure that you're still in tune for the next steps in your setup. Whenever you're adjusting a tune-o-matic, this has a pretty low string tension on it because of the Bigsby, but sometimes on a Les Paul SG, a guitar with a stop tailpiece, it might have a lot of tension on the bridge due to the break angle of the strings to the tailpiece. If the thumb wheels are too tight to turn by your fingers, you can use the spanner wrench that's in the Guitar Tech's toolkit to adjust the thumb wheels. You just put it on and you can grab the knurling on the wheel and you can turn it clockwise or counterclockwise with this little wrench. It's very handy. Or you can just loosen your strings, take off the tension, adjust it, retune, and check it again. But there's a lot of back and forth with that. So now I'm going to play every note on the guitar to make sure that it plays cleanly. And the reason I'm doing it at this point is that we've now set our neck relief and our action height. So the goal is that we have a guitar that plays comfortably and cleanly. If we're playing each note and we find that some are buzzy, then we would either need to raise the action or have the guitar assessed for possible fretwork. Hard to get up to those, but so far the last thing you're going to want to do if you're a blues player or a bender is you want to bend your notes and make sure that nothing's choking out. If you bend the string up and it just dies, then you may need to raise your action. This is particularly true on a vintage Fender neck with a tight 7 1/4 radius. You often have to have the high E string a little bit higher than typical in order to be able to bend notes cleanly. But this guitar is playing great. It plays super clean and bends smoothly and cleanly. So I think that this 60-50 action is going to work really well on this guitar. The next step, after having set our truss rod for our neck relief, our bridge radius, and our action height, is going to be cutting the nut slots correctly. So we will use the same set of nut files that we got out for our bridge saddles. And again, these correspond to the gauges of the strings that I have on the guitar. An easy way, if you aren't familiar with the individual string gauges in a pack of 10s, 9s, 11s, whatever you use, is to keep your string pack handy on your bench so that you can cross-reference the gauges that are listed on the pack to make sure that you're using the right size nut files. And it's really double check that you're using the right size nut file for the string. Sometimes in the classes I teach, it's very common for people to just inadvertently pick up the wrong size file, and they'll be filing too small of a slot. And so they'll file and say, you know, man, my string isn't getting any lower, and it's because they're cutting a channel that's too narrow. So just double check. It's simple to do. Make sure, okay, I'm doing my low E, that's a 46 file, you're good to go. So nut height is really critical on a guitar. The nut is just such a simple little piece of plastic or bone, but it really governs so much of the playability of an instrument. If the nut slots are too high, the intonation can be out in the first position because you're stretching the string down too far and making it too tight before it hits the fret. So you want to have your nut slots correct for your intonation. If the nut slots are too tight, the tuning stability will suffer, especially on a guitar with a tremolo like this one with this Bigsby. If the slots are not cut with the correct back filing, you can have overtones and sitaring in the nut slots. So taking your time here and really being diligent about getting these correct is going to pay off in the playability, tuning stability, and overall just usefulness of your guitar. So I'm going to use my MusicNomad nut height gauge to measure the nut heights. So what I mean by measuring the nut heights is I'm measuring the gap between the string and the first fret. And this is, again, it's really crucial to have the correct height at the nut. If you find that you're taking your measurements and you find that a nut slot is too low, as long as it's not so low that it feels strange in relation to the other strings, or so low that the open string is buzzing, you don't really have to worry about it. The sure sign that a nut slot is too low is that the open string, when you pluck it, it buzzes. So that's the main thing to be aware of. So on the nut height gauge, we have a series of gauges from 12 thousandths of an inch up to 22 thousandths of an inch in thickness. And they're marked on here what gauge you'll use for what strings on your guitar. So for this guitar, I'm going to use the 20 thousandths gauge, the 18 thousandths, and the 16. And they're marked 20 is going to be my low E and A, then 18 is going to be my D and the G, and then 16 is going to be my B and my high E. So these are all appropriate heights that will play comfortably and in tune. So the way that this measurement gets done is very similar to the way that you measure the neck relief. So to measure my nut heights, I'm going to put the guitar in the playing position, and I won't fret or do anything with the strings. So just like the truss rod gauge, I'm going to use the nut height gauge between the string and the fret, and I'm looking for does it touch or not? And you have a little legend on the gauge showing that if you have no touch, meaning that the gauge does not touch the string, that shows that you file the nut. And if it touches and you have no buzz, then you don't file the nut and you're good to go. So on this one, I have a very light touch. So it is touching. I can hear that it is touching. So I'm not going to file that nut slot. In order to measure my A string, I'm going to push the gauge under the E, and I'm just going to come in and measure the A just the same way. And I definitely am getting some touch on that A. So it is also within spec. To verify, I can hit my open strings and I can hear that there is no buzz on either with a good solid attack on those strings. So my nut heights are right on spec. Then I'll move over to my 18 thousandths gauge, and I'll push that underneath the E and the A. And I am getting touch on that D string for sure. I can see the string lifting just ever so slightly at the second fret. So if you're having a hard time determining is it touching, you can, as you push this gauge under the string, you can look at the second fret and see, do you see it moving just a little bit? Sometimes that's a good way to get clued in on that. And just so you know, I might get lucky on this guitar. Maybe I'm not even going to have to cut the nut slots. That happens sometimes, but usually there's plenty of work to do. So measuring the G, B, and the E is a little trickier because you're coming in from underneath, but you can go ahead and come in under the high E string and the B string, and now I'm putting it under the G, and it looks like I have just a tiny, tiny gap there. So I'm going to file that G nut slot down just a touch. So depending on the break angle of the strings and depending on the design of the guitar, sometimes you can just pull the string up and out of the slot without loosening it, like I was able to do on this Gretsch. If you feel like it's a little too tight, you can just loosen the string and pull it out of the way. That's easy as well. So now for this string, I know that this G is a 17 thousandths of an inch string, so I'm going to make sure 17 thousandths of an inch nut file. And just like I address the saddles, I'm going to be above the guitar and coming in from the right. So I'm going to put my nut file right in the slot, and I'm going to angle it down a little bit towards the peg head, and then I'm just going to give it a couple of easy strokes. And it had some dirt in the bottom of the slot that now is gone, so I know I've removed some material. So I'm going to go ahead and put my string back into the slot. If you do move your strings under tension, be aware that the wound strings can mar the top of the nut. So just for safety's sake, loosening the strings on the low, the wound strings is good, just so you don't put marks on the top of your nut. So now that I've cut that down, I'm going to come back in with my 18 gauge. And now I can feel just the tiniest drag there. So I've got that string down to spec now at 18 thousandths of an inch. So now for my high E and my B string, I'm going to drop down to 16 thousandths of an inch. And same thing, I'm going to come in from this side. And if you want to, if you have the ability, you can push the string with your hand to see if there's any gap there, and I'm not getting any gap. So that's good on the B. But I do have a little bit of movement. I do have a little bit of room on the E string, so I'm going to go ahead and file down that high E a little bit. So for that, I'm going to use the 10 gauge string. And on any guitar that has a Gibson style peg head, like this Gretsch, if you pull the strings, the outer E's out of the slots under tension, they can mar this corner of the headstock. So definitely on your outer E's, you want to be sure to loosen the string before you take it out of the slot so that it doesn't lay on this corner with a lot of tension and chip up your finish. So now for sure, I'm going to use my 10 thousandths of an inch file for my 10 thousandths of an inch string. And be aware that the files cut quicker the thinner they are. So you want to be careful using your 10, 13, 17 particularly because they can cut more quickly than the larger files. So using these files is really a pleasure. They have a diamond coating that cuts consistently and evenly, and it leaves a nice smooth polished surface on the bottom of the nut slot, so I don't have to go back in with sandpaper or anything to polish out my slots like I would have to with a tooth file. Also, the files are all made with a rounded profile, so the nut slot has a perfectly round profile to match the string, so that really helps with tuning stability and clarity of note at the nut. And also, if you're in a spot that's has a little bit more space constraints, if you can take off the end of the handle and you can take the file out and you can use the file just by itself. So I'll just do that since I have it out. And so I'm just going to cut that down a little bit. Tune it back to pitch. And that is just touching the gauge. So that is a correctly cut nut. Now, you might find that you have correct nut heights, but you have other issues. You might find that if you tune the string up and down, you hear pinging or some noise as you're tuning your guitar. There's a couple of things you can do for that. One, you can take your nut file and just barely file the slot, just enough to recreate the proper profile, not enough to lower the string. So one of the great things about the diamond coated MusicNomad nut files is that they polish the bottom of the nut slot. So if you have a guitar that has properly cut nut heights but still has pinging or binding in the nut, you can take the file and just very lightly reprofile the slot to have a correct round bottom that will allow the string to tune evenly, will reduce string breakage, and make sure that you have a really nice clear note at the open string. So let me show you how you would do that. So I'm going to take my low E string and I'm going to take that out of the nut slot. I'm going to take my 46 thousandths of an inch nut file that matches the gauge of the string, and I'm going to put this in the slot here, and I mean with almost no pressure, I'm just going to file the slot until I feel that the file is moving very smoothly. Whenever I first started filing, I could feel just a little bit of a binding, and that's because the profile of the slot was not round. But as I gently floss the file through the slot, it reprofiled to the correct string dimension and the correct roundness, and now the file moves very smoothly through the slot, and my string is going to tune easily, stay in tune, and sound right. So now we've set our truss rod, we've set our action height and radius at the bridge, and we've cut our nut slots. So nice job so far. You know, cutting the nut can seem really intimidating, but if you just are deliberate and cautious, you'll do fine. The files and the measuring tools will make it totally doable. So, just be patient with yourself and have fun. So here we are with a guitar that's set up almost. It plays great, no fret buzz, action height's good, nut height's good, but does it play in tune with itself? That's where the intonation process comes in. So the way that works is the saddles have a forward and backward adjustment that is done by this little screw that goes through the saddle at the bridge. Now the way that the intonation adjustment works is that you play your open string, get it perfectly in tune, then play the fretted note at the 12th fret and check on the tuner, is it sharp or flat or in tune. If your fretted note at the 12th fret plays sharp, you're going to want to move your saddle back away from the neck to increase your scale length. If your fretted note plays flat, you're going to want to move your saddle forward to shorten the scale length. Now your bridge could be in either orientation. It could have the screws on the front or it could have the screws on the back, just depending on how the guitar was put together. So you may need to tighten your screw to pull the saddle forward, or you may need to loosen your screw to move the saddle forward. So just be aware of which direction you need to turn your screw in order to move your saddle. So the reason that you need to make the adjustment at all on the guitar is that if your saddles were at exactly the length of the scale, all of your fretted notes would be sharp. When you push down your string towards the frets, you're increasing the tension of the string, just like if you were bending a note. So by the time you've pushed your string down and it contacts the fret, the tension is higher, so now the pitch is raised. So in order to compensate for that, you lengthen the scale of the guitar to flatten that note, so when you get to the fret, the actual note that you hear is the correct pitch. On this guitar, the screws are on the neck side of the bridge, so in order to lengthen the scale, I'm going to loosen the screws to the left, and if I need to shorten the scale, I'm going to turn the screw to the right. So the way that this happens is with the guitar in the playing position. So the first thing that you'll do is get your guitar as in tune as you can. I mean, you want it to really be perfect. It's easy with strobe tuner. You can see when the bars lock and they stop spinning, you know you're in tune. And if they're turning counterclockwise, you know the note is flat. And if they're turning clockwise, you know the note is sharp. But here I am with my guitar very close to perfectly in tune. So now I will play my 12th fret on my low E string. And that is perfect. There's no need to make any adjustment on that saddle. If you play high up on the neck, you might want to check up at your 17th fret as well. And this is also very good. So I would not make any adjustments on that string. So now I'll move over to my A string. It's a tiny bit flat, so I'm going to want to just bring that up just a bit. There we go. Okay, so it's a little bit flat on the 12th fret. So I'm going to move my saddle which way? Going to move it forward. So I'm going to grab a screwdriver with a little small sized flathead bit. So now I'm going to get my string out of the way and I'm going to turn my screw clockwise, and that's going to tighten the screw into the saddle, which is going to draw the saddle forward. So I'll come in here. And on this, you're going to want to see the saddle move a little bit, at least in the initial movement. So you might need to give it a couple of turns. I know that you've just come from cutting the nut, so everything's like a tiny little movement, but you actually do want to see the saddle move a little bit. So I move my saddle forward. And now we'll go back to our open string. That's very good. And that is now perfect. So now I'll move over to the D. It's a little bit flat. There we go. That looks really good. I'm going to leave that. Move over to my G. G looks really good too. B is right on the money. E is a little flat. That looks great. So we got lucky on that one. Only the A string needed to be adjusted. Now there's a specific way the saddles are going to line up whenever the guitar is intonated properly. You're going to have your low E is going to be the farthest back, and then your A and D step towards the neck because they're thinner. The thicker the string, the more compensation it needs. So you're going to have your wound strings in line, and then your G drops back a little bit because it's thicker than the core of the D string, and then the B and the E will move forward from there. So you find that you have this kind of two staggered angles here. You've got the E, A, and D in a line, and then the G, B, and E are in a similar line, but they're just set back a little bit. So I could have seen that. I saw whenever I went to intonate this saddle that the A saddle was actually in line with the low E, which is not going to be intonated correctly. It needs to be forward of the E saddle. So if I would have just looked at it, I would have been able to tell that it was out of intonation most likely. So that is all of the playability setup work on this guitar. So we have one more step, and that is to adjust our pickup heights. This guitar has 2 screws on the bass side for pickup leveling, which is nice, so you can keep the pickup level to the strings. But the treble side screws are obscured by the pick guard, so I'm going to need to go ahead and remove the pick guard in order to access those screws. So I use a Phillips bit to remove this screw. And I've got 2 screws over here on the side of the guitar. And now I have the access to the single screw on the treble side. And there's a little spacer on this guitar for the pick guard, so you want to make sure you keep up with that. What's nice is in the setup guide, you have specs for your pickup heights. So I'm going to look in here on page 21, and I'm going to see on a humbucker, which these are humbuckers, they have 2 coils, so they buck the hum. That's how that word came about. I'm going to set my pickup height on my bridge pickup to be 1/16 away from the strings, and then I'll set my neck pickup to be 3/32 away, and then I'll verify by ear that I have those set correctly. So the way that that gets done is I'll fret at the last fret, and I'm going to take my pickup height gauge here on the front of the MusicNomad string action gauge, and I have 1/16 of an inch measurement right there. This is a little high. It's very high on the treble side. It's about 1/32. So I'm going to go ahead and lower down the pickup by loosening these screws. So these screws go into the pickup's base plate, and there are springs between the base plate and the top of the guitar. So when I loosen the screws, the pickup goes down. When I tighten the screws, the pickup comes up. So I'll do that. Loosen up my treble side to lower that down. And now fret it at the last fret. I'm going to remeasure. And I'm looking right at 1/16 on the bass side, and I am a little bit low on the treble side now. There we go, that looks good. And now I'll check my neck pickup, and I want that to be at 3/32. It's just a tiny bit low. And it was a little bit unlevel, so I think just leveling it out is going to get me to the height I want. Yep, 3/32 on the bass, and looking at 3/32 right on the money on the treble side. But the proof is in the sound. Turn everything up. So this guitar has a master volume, and then it has an individual volumes for each pickup, and it has a master tone control, and then this is a pickup selector. Setting your pickup heights by playing in the middle of the neck is going to give you kind of an average output. As you play lower, your neck pickup output goes down because the strings are farther from the pickup, and as you play higher up the neck, your neck pickup output goes up because the strings get closer to the pickup. So playing in the middle of the neck, you're kind of averaging everything out. So we're listening to our bridge pickup, and then against our neck pickup. The neck pickup sounds a little soft to me and a little bit low volume, so I'm going to raise it up just a bit. And it is up about as high as it will go. So that's about what we're going to get. It's pretty close. It's pretty close. This, like I said, this pickup has gone up as high as it will adjust. If you really wanted to make it higher, you could pull the ring off, take out the springs, and get a little bit more movement. Or if you just thought, you know, I have to have these exactly the same output to my ear, you could just lower the bridge pickup down just a little bit to even it out. But I would leave it like this. Clicking it over to the bridge is going to give you a little bit of extra boost if you want to play leads, and they're very even. So I'm pretty happy with it. So that is our pickup height adjustment. Now I just need to put everything back on the guitar, the pick guard and the truss rod cover. So with the pickup height adjustment, you know, you'll notice that my initial measurements I set to the book spec. Every guitar is different, pickup outputs are different, so even though they're set to spec, you always want to listen to them and readjust by ear if needed to make sure that your pickup outputs are even across all your switching positions. The truss rod cover. And you can put that back on after you do your truss rod adjustment if you want to. So here we are with a Gretsch that now plays incredibly well, stays in tune, plays super comfortably. One of the really great things about learning how to do your setups with this process and using the tools is that you can start becoming familiar with the setup specs that you like for your own instruments. That will help you to be able to set up all your instruments in a way that they work well for you. And using the measuring tools allows you to make minor adjustments to your setup without going too far in one direction or the other. That's a very common thing that I hear is, oh, I took my guitar in and they just turned the truss rod, or they just raised or lowered the bridge just some amount. But you can make very minute adjustments if you know how to use the measuring tools, so it's a really great skill to learn to help you in your journey to make your guitars play the way that you want them to. So I think that you'll find that this setup process, you know, taken step by step, is easy and fun. And so I hope that you enjoy working on your instruments as much as I enjoy working on your instruments. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments and we'll see you next time.
For more videos on how to perform guitar setups or care for your frets, subscribe to our channel and visit MusicNomadCare.com for all our products and how-to videos.